Folks, the Winnipeg Jets have done something that I didn't think was, well, possible this season. They have started to make folks believe. And, belief is always a dangerous thing. Maybe, the Jets are going to disappoint us in the end, but you know what? Sometimes you just have to give in and have a little bit of fun. Now, I was curious to know how the fan base is feeling, so I asked a few questions, and we're going to talk about how the Jets fan base is feeling so far about Winnipeg's start to the 2022-23 NHL season, all coming right up on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday, Winnipeg fans. Welcome to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, including Apple, Spotify, Google, Megaphone, Odyssey, and YouTube. Now, like I said at the intro, tonight's episode is dedicated to finding out how the Jets fan base really does feel about the current run of form. Do they like the coaching staff? Do they feel players like Scheifele and company are really stepping up to the plate? How do they rate their performances so far? And where is there room for improvement? Obviously, the Jets are still figuring things out. It's only, 11 or 12 games into the season. And so the Jets still have plenty of room for growth, which means, the fan base is going to have some differing thoughts. Now, we didn't get a ton of responses this go around. Obviously, folks are probably taking a little bit of a break from the Jets just for a couple of days. We won't see Winnipeg until this weekend when their schedule suddenly becomes very congested. But I had a first question for folks, and this one got the most responses. I said, grade the non-special teams coaching staff's performance so far. And as always, I started off with A, B, C, or D or lower using letter grades. I only have 4 choices. So, obviously you got to make the most of what you got. And the responses, I think, are pretty much what I would say I expected. So based on around 28 to 30 responses, around 18% have given the non-special team staff an A, 71% have given them a B, 7% have given them a C, and just under 4% have elected D or lower. So most folks are feeling pretty decent about the coaching staff. We've only seen a little bit of Rick Bowness so far. I think his philosophies and stuff have certainly informed Brad Lauer and Scott Arniel, but the Jets played, in my opinion, a pretty different game against the Dallas Stars than what we've seen in some of these other games where they were matched up against really good teams. Is that because Bones had some kind of an impact on the coaching staff? I don't know. We haven't really seen enough of Rick to have a full, analysis of his impact. So I think a lot of these ratings are based on what we've seen from at least the other parts of the coaching staff. How do we feel about Arniel and company? And I think a B is fair, right? There were some games where the Jets kind of got smoked. They really weren't playing all that well, and even though they might have gotten points out of the game, the Jets still have room for growth, and we haven't seen enough of Bones yet to know if he's the guy. But I would say a B for me is what I would give it. I think the Jets are on the right path, and I think that's the most important thing, right? Not everything is going to be amazing, but you know what? You got a place to start, and so far, at least, things are feeling halfway decent, which is a lot better than what we might have been expecting. We're all conditioned for disappointment over the last few years. It's been pretty tough under the previous coaching regimes, but now the Jets might have turned a corner, and it feels pretty good. The game against the Stars, maybe that is a sign of things to come. But, obviously, that's just the non-special teams coaching staff. I asked how folks felt about the special teams coaching staff, and that got a bit of a different response pool. Obviously, a lot fewer responses, but based on 13 votes, we have around 54% saying B, 31% saying C, and 15% saying D or lower. For me, I'm kind of in the C or D category. I think the special teams have really struggled. They've only looked better recently because A, Hellebuck is our team's best PKer, and B, the Jets had a couple of really nice finishes for power play goals a couple of nights ago that might have padded the stats a little bit. But in general, the special teams this year have been kind of messy. The power play for me, it's got some issues with like the speed of the puck movement. It just feels too slow. I think that's something that Winnipeg really wants to sort out. You want that sort of bang bang puck movement that's a lot faster, that starts to stretch out, defensive structures, because right now PK Diamonds are having a relatively straightforward time of being able to predict which Jets shooters are taking shots when. They can follow the puck pretty well. They can track the shot in passing lanes. And while the Jets do have some really phenomenal shooters on the power play, obviously, if you just default to KFC every single time, it does get a bit on the predictable side. So that's, a bit of an issue, something that I think they can certainly fix. But the PK is kind of where I think the Jets really have issues. It really hasn't improved all that much in terms of how many opportunities the Jets are conceding. You know, it's one of those things that I thought Arneal might have a more pronounced impact on, but so far it hasn't really um, looked like a PK for me that is in the league leaders. And honestly, the PK percentage hasn't been outstanding either. It's better than it was in previous seasons, but when you actually look at the underlying metrics of what the Jets are conceding and how Winnipeg has performed, the PK, it's modest, right? So I feel like for me, most people voted B. I would go a little bit lower than that. I would say C on special teams. There's a lot of room for improvement, and some of it might need to be because of like some roster changes. I think as it is, it's getting the job done enough. But long term, you'd probably think the special teams need at least a couple of tweaks to really start to hit their stride. The power play should be a really big strength for this team. Thus far, it's just been pretty mediocre, and the PK for the Jets has always sucked. So, I mean, it's just business as usual with that. But, take it in conjunction with how the Jets have done at even strength and, in other situations, it's something you can work on. So, you know, not to get too down on it. The special teams, work in progress, very fixable though. Now, I have plenty of other questions, some of which are a little bit more player centric and player focused. We'll talk about how y'all are feeling about some of the guys like Mark Scheifele and where DeMelo is playing in the lineup in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at betonline.net. BetOnline is your number one source for all of your sports betting info, including stats, news, and analysis for all of your favorite sports, whether you're into basketball, baseball, football, soccer, hockey. Of course, this is a hockey podcast, so of course BetOnline has you covered there, especially for you Winnipeg Jets fans. But they've also got esports and stuff. And if you don't love, sports or something, maybe you're looking for a change of pace or just a break from the usual. They've also got Vegas casino games. They want to offer something for everyone, whether you're a diehard sports fan or not. So head on over to betonline.net right now. They've also got great things like podcasts, multimedia, news updates, live scores, all of the information to help you make the most informed bets possible. And as always, BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix on. If you're ready to get started, register for a free account at betonline.net with your laptop or mobile device, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We're taking a look at some fan feedback. I always like to ask every once in a while, some fan questions, some poll results. I want to see how the fan base is feeling. Before we dive into some questions that might pertain to some more granular decisions and things, I do want to let you know that you should also check out our Locked On Sports Today podcast. It features the games that matter to the biggest stories in sports and helps you go behind the scenes and beyond the scoreboard with expert analysis that only Locked On can provide. You can follow Locked On Sports Today on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, same as where Locked On Jets is available, and as always, it is free to subscribe. Now, looking at the Jets, and some of the players on the team. I've had a couple of questions pertaining to that more specifically. Like I said, we didn't get a ton of responses this go around, but there's some decent enough results to where I think you can kind of get a sense of how people feel. One question I asked is, how would you grade Mark Scheifele's start to the season? And based on around 14 or 15 votes, 86% said it's an A, and 14% said B. No one else had anything lower than a B. And yeah, I'm firmly in the A camp. I think he's had a marvelous start. This, for me, has been Scheifele's best season in years, not just because of the points and scoring and stuff. That's always really wonderful, but just in general, he looks refreshed and happy. Under Maurice, you started noticing towards the end there that he just did not seem to be happy at work. He didn't seem like he cared about some of his shifts. And you could kind of get the sense of the frustration building up for him over the years. And it just sort of ballooned into a problem where, on his shifts, there were times that he kind of looked like he quit. And I would imagine that, when Stastny and some of the other players were talking about guys not feeling like they were giving 100%, might have been Mark on that list for some of his teammates. But this year, no question, he's back and better than ever. Right now, he's one of the top skaters in the entire league in expected goal creation, differential, and actual points creation. So he's had a monster start. Even without Ehlers at his wing, he looks refreshed. It's been a great start to the season, and I really hope he keeps it up because for me, this is one of our most important players. And if he finally gets going again and he's back to where, he can truly be, Scheifele is still a game breaking presence. I mean, he really is one of the most creative guys out there, and he can help get this Jets team to a playoff spot. Now, kind of on a related note, on the back end of things, I asked a question: should DeMelo go back to the first pairing with Morrissey? Obviously, I've spoken at length that Morrissey Pionk is not doing super well, but whether the coaching staff really agrees with that, it's hard to say. But based on around 14 votes, again, around 57% said yes, he should go back on the first pairing. 21% are leaning yes, 14% are leaning no, and 7% are leaning no. For me, this is a very strong yes. I think it has to be a decision that the Jets go with. Um, Honestly, Pionk just really needs the help too. You can tell that he's pissed about how he's performing. And like Neil has always been a really accountable guy. He's a very stand-up player, and when it comes to his own performance, there's no one who's harsher on his performance than himself. So I think the Jets just need to make this happen. DeMelo has been carrying pretty much anyone he plays with on that third pairing. He's been dominating his minutes, and he looks like he's back after a little bit of rest to start the season. So I think he should definitely go alongside Morrissey. Josh himself has been doing a really good job on that first pairing, but alongside Pionk, it's just been a bit of a challenge to kind of dial back some of Neil's more chaotic decisions and get him feeling comfortable again. So, take the burden off of Neil's shoulders, get DeMelo back up on the first pairing. If you have that with Morrissey and DeMelo on your first pairing and Dylan and Schmidt as your second pairing, that's a pretty workable top four with some room for growth. Obviously, Sandberg, Pionk, or whatever other combo they have might have some issues, but it's probably better to have two really good pairings rather than kind of like a less impactful third pairing that's still really good, but may not be getting as many minutes. So yeah, let's make that switch. But the coaching staff might still want to view Pionk, at least for the time being, as a top pairing guy. Now, one more question before we take a brief pause is, from a macro level, do you think the Jets will finish in the top three of the Central? Based on another 14 responses, 14% of you are saying yes, 64% are leaning yes, 14% are leaning no, and 7% are just outright no. I am in the yes camp, not even just leaning. I think the Jets are very much in a good position to finish in the top three, in part because the Central Division this year looks really bad. Outside of like some of the usual standby teams, almost everyone's really struggling. I mean, Winnipeg has kind of risen to the top very quickly. They're mixing it up with Dallas at the top there. They're currently in the first spot because of the tiebreaker, and they have a game in hand. So the Jets are doing really well. They've had a great start to the year, and I think Hellebuck can really carry and paper over a lot of any of Winnipeg's issues while the team's still sorting out how to play under bonus. But look, if what we saw against Dallas in their last game is anything to go by, this Jets team, the best of this season is yet to come. And I think that should be an exciting prospect for a lot of folks. I'm personally very anticipatory of the heart of the season coming up, especially once Ehlers is healthy enough to come back. Nick is one of our most important players, and somehow the Jets are 8-3-1 without him. So, uh, jokes aside, in terms of him not needing to come back because of chemistry, he'll go right back into the top six, make this team look even more dangerous. And you know what? After that, the sky's the limit. We'll see what the Jets are going to be doing this year. But I think Central Division top three, I'm saying they're going to do it, and I'm confident in that. But realistically, leaning yes is probably they're showing us some stuff that I'm excited about, and I think Winnipeg is, well, at least vibes wise, feeling pretty darn good. Now, I have a few other macro questions that I think are worth circling back on. We'll talk about those and how the Jets fans are feeling, whether they're optimistic about the season or not, in just a little bit. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Not sure we had a brief connection outage, so you maybe missed my last little bit of a lead in. I was just suggesting that the Jets are obviously in a pretty good spot, and I wanted to close out with some final questions for Winnipeg fans about how they're feeling. So, one of our last three questions we've got for this evening is, how do you feel about Winnipeg's chances of making the postseason? And based on 14 votes, we've got 29% who are optimistic and 71% in somewhat optimistic. I just said I was firmly in the yes camp of the top three of the Central Division being a likely thing. So I'm going to go again here and say optimistic. I think at worst, the Jets are going to finish in like one of the wild card spots, but I think the Jets have pretty good room to climb here. Um, I don't know. Something about this team feels a little bit different this year. Hellebuck's playing at a Vezina caliber level. The Jets' offense is a little bit inconsistent at times, but they're starting to show that they have a higher ceiling than they've had under Maurice over the last few years. I think that's really important. And like the special teams are bad right now, but if they start to kind of figure it out, they add Ehlers back into the mix. There's a really good chance that the Jets might start cooking with grease. This is a team that has a lot of headroom for growth. Now, of course, things might go really poorly for this team. They might go through some really rough patches this year. Maybe they start losing a bunch of games and the prognosis kind of flips and does a 180. But so far, so good. So I'm optimistic. I think the Jets are going to make the postseason, and it seems like most Jets fans are at least somewhat optimistic that Winnipeg's on the right path. Um, Now, this is kind of where it gets a little more controversial. I wanted to know how people think of the roster. How are they feeling with the Jets as currently constructed? Based on 16 votes, no one said it's fine as is. Around 31% said mostly fine, 63% said needs a few tweaks, and 6% said needs considerable change. I am definitely in the needs a few tweaks category. I think for me, I've talked about the back end needing more puck movers. That is something I still hold to, but I also think the Jets could use another like top nine winger of some sort with some finishing talent. The bottom six is actually doing pretty well, even though I wouldn't mind a little more scoring punch there. But the top six could definitely use an injection just to add a little more balance to the top nine. It'd be wonderful if the Jets could run like three different scoring lines of a lot of high end skill. That's not a luxury the Jets have had in recent years, but they're really, really close to having that this year. The only problem is as soon as somebody gets injured, suddenly the depth starts to get tested, and Winnipeg can find itself on the wrong end of an injury crisis. But given where this team was last year and what we've seen with what Bones is accomplishing this season, it's not bad. There's nice room for growth, and if Chevy finally goes shopping, there's a good chance to really turn this team into something special. Now, the last question I had, it was a very simple one. Grade Winnipeg's start to the season overall. Around 47% of people from a pool of 19 or 20 votes said the Jets have an A, and 53% are at B. So I'm going to give them an A. I know that that's probably a little generous and maybe a little overkill, but look, given that the team hasn't been uh, really playing bones hockey, it's mostly been under Scott Arniel and the assistant coaching staff. They've been down Nikolai Ehlers. They've had a myriad of injuries. The defense is getting shuffled around constantly. The Jets having an 8-3-1 record so far is awesome. And there are some signs that it's a record that the Jets could very well deserve. I don't know if they'll be able to continue sustaining this level of standings points pace, but you know what? For the time being, just enjoy the ride. I think that this team is a lot more fun to watch than previous years. Is it very flawed? Absolutely. And I think at times they'll be very frustrating, but so far, this Jets team, I think they deserve a lot of credit for hanging tough. I think that they've done a great job trying to adapt to what Bones wants. Not everything is going to be a smooth transition because some of these guys just don't quite have the full tool sets for what Rick is looking for, but they're really working hard. They're trying to focus on a lot of the problem areas. And I think we've seen genuine growth, which that's what I said I wanted at the start of the season. So far, Winnipeg is giving that to us. But, obviously I want to hear what y'all think because maybe y'all haven't voted on the polls. Be sure to let me know at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets on Twitter or in the YouTube comments below. Answer any of these questions, grade the season, grade some of the players. Give me any other feedback you want to maybe have discussed. I think that there's a lot to explore with this team. And you know what? I'm excited for the rest of the season. I hope y'all are too. Uh, there just seemingly has this different vibe around this team, which is about dang time. I mean, Canada Life Center against the Stars was rocking, and that's a lot because Canada Life Center, past couple of years, it's been a mausoleum. This place sounded like it was getting closer to the glory days when every Jets game was a sellout and everyone was so hyped. So let me know how you're feeling. I'm sure a lot of you are excited, and I think it's worth being excited too. But for tonight's episode, that is going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we'll probably have some previews on the upcoming slate of games as Winnipeg prepares for a very busy next 2 weeks. But again, like I said, that's all the time that we have for this evening. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and our famous take of the day. It's available in all of your favorite podcasting platforms, so be sure to like, follow, and subscribe right now. And as always, thank you for listening. Have a great night, and go Jets go.